Yeah, of course it's happening in Britain. Britain is Russia's bank. It's where they send all their filthy money.
You can put both the election of Donald Trump and the Brexit vote, which is costing us something like 4% of GDP a year, and the people behind it are in the Kremlin.
We know that the Conservatives had the Conservative Friends of Russia. We know that Boris Johnson went over to Italy, to have a party with Lebedev, who is now in the House of Lords. These issues are here, as I said, like an open wound, rotting. Look what Vladimir Putin is doing to Ukraine. They don't need to send weapons over to Britain because we're infested with Russian interference in our entire system. We don't need bombs, we've got propaganda here. Not only that, we've got interference at the heart of power.
Now this week, Byline Frontline takes us online. Yes, while there's a war raging in the trenches of Ukraine, more deaths as missiles come in, there is another war, a hybrid war, being conducted across the world through Russian disinformation. Back 7 years ago, when Special Counsel Robert Mueller investigated online operations, many people dismissed his investigation as the Russia hoax. 7 years on, that fire hose of falsehood of bot farms and social media accounts has got more sophisticated. Yes, not only has the Tenet media indictment revealed former RT, Russia Today employees, using super spreaders, influencers online. We now can see the tip of the iceberg, we believe, of that money. The indictments say there are other accounts RT has been funding. But there was a second indictment, and that looked at this new phenomenon of the doppelganger. And this is working directly for Vladimir Putin. We know from the indictment straight to his office. And what they are doing is creating false media sites, emulating mainstream media. So it's got more sophisticated and more influential. And the difference is, in 2016, it was just about the presidential campaign. There had been war ongoing in Ukraine since 2014, but now thousands are dying every month. And this is trying to distract us and misinform us. And now we're going to talk to somebody who needs very little introduction, automatically recognizable with his orange hat, a man who's confronted both Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. Yes, the great reporter, John Sweeney. And he'll be explaining how these tentacles of hybrid warfare, you have kinetic warfare, which is explosions, hybrid warfare, which is influence operations, extend not just to America, but to the heart of Britain's democracy, and indeed have shown themselves in the recent riots which erupted this summer.
If the Russians have got this very sophisticated disinformation machinery in place in Tennessee, then I'm interested in the anomaly. They do it in the United States, but they don't do it in Britain, or do they? So I think what's happening is that Russia has a project to essentially bugger up all of the Western democracies, and obviously America is the most powerful by far, but nevertheless they will be doing something similar. I would imagine, that's my hypothesis, across the Western world. Now, Britain we have been, despite all the failings of the Conservative government, it is true to say that in terms of not, Britain didn't give much kit, but it did give the kit ahead of others who were afraid to do so. So, for example, we gave the NLAW anti-tank weapons straight away for the Battle of Kyiv. That was very, very good. When there was an anxiety about long-range artillery, the British gave our Storm Shadows to the Ukrainians ahead of the Americans, ahead of the Germans. And again, that happened with tanks. We gave Challenger 2 tanks before anybody else did. These are big main battle tanks. So Britain is a clear thorn in the side of dark Russian power. So I would imagine that as I read these stories about the Tenet company paying a lot of money for useful idiots in the States to push out a series of Russian messages, some of which, by the way, have got nothing to do with Russia. It's just about boosting racial unease, boosting. Some of the time, what they end up doing is praising some Muslims to further rise and stoke Islamophobia across the United States. Now, I suspect that is happening in Britain too. I'd be astonished if it wasn't happening in Britain too. The problem is that it feels like our authorities are not good enough, or are not open enough, or not fast enough to do what the Americans are doing and saying, hey, look, here's the evidence. So I think we're at the wrong end of a Russian disinformation program, but the people who we appoint and expect to deliver on this are not delivering. They need to raise their game. The problem is that the Conservative Party didn't want to know that there's something dark about some of the forces pushing for Brexit. Now, obviously, there's a lot of very, very good people, including good friends of mine, who support Brexit, and they think this is all nonsense. But I think they're wrong in that, yes, there's a lot of people who are fed up with the European Union. Yes, there are a lot of people who did want whatever, more sovereignty, all of that. And there's a lot of people in the middle who didn't know really what the consequences of voting for Brexit were. And what we've done is we've effectively pulled ourselves out of the world's largest trading bloc for no particular good reason, in my view, and actually for a number of bad reasons. A weak Britain and a weak British economy helps Russian power. A weak Europe, or a weakened Europe, helps Russian power. And by the way, of course, the Russians have put a lot of money into helping, pushing for the forces that would split up Spain and also the United Kingdom. So, for example, Sputnik News, which was one of the Russian disinformation centres in Britain, it was based in Edinburgh. Of course it was. And one of the people who's a beneficiary of dark Russian money at Russia Today was Alex Salmond, the former leader of the Scottish National Party, who is, of course, now he's a bête noire amongst the SNP. Obviously, I've got lots of great Scottish friends, including former SNP Foreign Affairs spokesman Andrew MacDonald. These are good people who believe that Scotland would be better off independent than in the United Kingdom. Okay, I get that. But at the same time, you take, for example, Scotland goes independent, that really, really weakens the British Army, the British Armed Forces, the Royal Navy, all of those things. So Scottish independence is a clear goal of the dark Russian state, as is Brexit. Now, as it turns out, the further away we get from Brexit, the more the polling numbers are consistent and they tell the same story, that more and more people regret the decision and would prefer to rejoin. But what we don't know is, did dark Russian money really assist the Brexit vote? And I think that happened. The difficulty is that the Conservatives didn't want to know the answer to that question, so they didn't ask it. And the two bodies, so my friend Christopher Steele, the former MI6 head of Russia, the Russia House at MI6, who wrote the report about Donald Trump being a victim of Russian sex compromise, he believes, so the answer to the question is, did dark Russian money affect the Brexit vote? Well, for example, the National Crime Agency and the Electoral Commission looked at the affairs of Aaron Banks, who gave the biggest Brexit donation, £8 million, and they concluded that Banks had done nothing. Banks and his entities had done nothing wrong. So game over. What Christopher Steele says is, no, that's not quite right, because neither the National Crime Agency nor the Electoral Commission have the firepower, have the right people and the right machinery to properly answer that question. The reality is that both those agencies are underfunded, understaffed for this kind of work, and they don't have the chops. So what Chris says is what should happen is that MI6 and GCHQ should have they should be asked the question, did dark Russian money help the Brexit vote? And so the critical question has never been asked of the people with the right tools to answer it. And I would hope that the new Labour government would be changing that. The worry is that for a series of internal Labour Party reasons, Keir Starmer has taken a view that we're just going to live with Brexit, we're going to sit with it. Now, I think that is foolish economically. It's also foolish from a national security point of view. So my anxiety is what's happening here is there is a sense that we're being got at by the dark Russian state in Britain in exactly the same way as the Tenet stuff in the United States has shown a light. The Russians are screwing the United States. They are paying right-wing influencers to put out the Kremlin's dark nonsense in the States. And are they doing that in Britain? Well, we don't know because no one competent has been asked. It's released a heavily redacted version of the Russia report, which is virtually meaningless because the redactions are the interesting bits. So, for example, if you had the Sherlock Holmes, A Hound of the Baskervilles, and you delete the Baskervilles, and you redact the Hound, the something of the something, then the story loses its impact, I would say. And then you don't have, Grimp and Moore, you have XXX, XXX. And you don't have the Hound going, woo! All of that's gone. So we don't know what we're talking about. And by the way, there are little and big echoes of this. Let's take a little one. Today in the Times, there's a lovely interview with Sir Ian McKellen, Knight, I'd like to say Grand Dame. I'm sure he wouldn't be offended, and he's kind of a bit, and it's fascinating to read because he's a bit rude about the Queen, and you go woo, and it's also in the article it says that he's a co-owner of the Grapes pub in East London with Yevgeny Lebedev. Next point. And you just got, hold on, stop there. You've got an exclusive interview with Ian McKellen after he was injured acting, but he was playing false stuff. He fell off the stage. But his fellow pub owner is called Baron Siberia. So this is a man, and Colin Robinson and I have made a film about this. This is a man who is the son of a former KGB colonel who worked in London from 88 to 92, Alexander Lebedev. And Alexander Lebedev has been sanctioned by the Canadians and the Ukrainians, not by the British. His son is called Baron Siberia. His son sits in the House of Lords. And I'm just wondering, why on earth didn't that interviewer from the Times ask a simple question of Ian McKellen about the man he owns a pub with? Because this is I believe that Baron Siberia is a national security threat. He says that I'm a Russophobe. I say, no, I'm not. But that's a problem because it feels like whenever you look at the possibility of a soft influencer promoting Russian power, and this is sophisticated, some of this stuff. By the way, have you seen that just the other day, Putin has come out to support for Kamala Harris? Of course he has, because actually everybody knows, or everybody with half a mind knows, he's rooting for Donald Trump, who wants to stop the war in Ukraine on Russia's terms, who is a great supporter of Putin, who, despite being horrible about everybody all the time, has never said a critical word of Vladimir Putin. So what's happening here, folks, in America, so you're all clear, is that the Kremlin want Trump in the White House. They really, really do. But Putin is pretending he wants Kamala. It's just It's a game for them. But at the same time, we don't seem to be playing that game properly. So we should, and by the way, I believe that our intelligence people are good people, but they have lived for too long in the shadow of the Cold War, where you played this game in the shadows, and their culture is one of the things which makes Russia strong and us weak in this area, in this fighting area, because it means that it's better to redact information than to put it out there. But the problem is people won't take it seriously unless they see with their own eyes. So in this case, to defend our open society against attack from the dark Russian state, we need to switch the lights on. And that is why I'm in favor. Now, there may be three times in the report where you're actually protecting sources, for example, in Russia or sources in the West who need protection. That's one thing. I understand that. But I think there are too many occasions where timidity has said, no, timidity in a culture of staying in the shadows has overruled common sense. Our view, my view, is that the dark Russian state is at war with us and it's fucking us over badly. I'm struck by the fact that Vladimir Putin has become so much more successful on the millions he spent on disinformation than on the billions he spent on heavy metal, on tanks and rockets and all that stuff. So at the moment, if you look at the scorecard, I think that you can put both the election of Donald Trump and the Brexit vote, which is costing us something like 4% of GDP a year. By the way, that's £80 billion. It's a lot of money. And every year it keeps on going up. So it'll, in a few years' time, it'll be close to £1 trillion. This is an enormous amount of money that we've lost, and that has huge effects on the way we deliver services. For example, the riots that took place, were they just simply about misinformation that the person who killed those poor girls in Southport was a Muslim? No, I don't think so. I don't think it was a simple piece of misinformation. I think there's been reporting that there was a whole series of aggressive Facebook posts heightening Islamophobia, creating attention, and all of these are pumped out, and the people behind it are in the Kremlin. So we need to get tough with this, and we need to be open, and it requires a step change. My anxiety, I'm hoping things will get better, but my anxiety is that the Labour government doesn't want to reinterrogate Brexit. Well, actually, they bloody should, because if I'm right, then we have been conned by the dark Russian state. And the first moment when you're dealing with a confidence trickster is self-awareness. Bugger, fuck, I've been conned. That's the moment we start getting better. But it feels like the British establishment don't want to go there, and that's a mistake.
We're next joined by Mike Galsworthy, as well as having done a movie with John Sweeney about the Eastern Front under deadly skies. We did a big movie with Mike about Brexit. Now, Mike is an expert on that. And Mike, now we've seen more evidence, clear-cut evidence. I mean, they're into their comms, they're into their emails, they're following financial transactions of Russian interference in American politics. What do you make of this? And what does this say to all those people who dismissed yourself, myself, Carol Cadwallader as conspiracy theories, Carol as a mad cat lady, when we looked at the direct Russian interference emails, Levy figures, Farage's lieutenants going to the Russian embassy? What do you think about all that now?
We are seeing continuation of the pattern and more clarification of the pattern. It's just further evidence that Russia is doing what we long suspected it was doing, which is identifying that the soft underbelly in democracies is its free speech and open conversation. And if you can come in there hard and push media and social media hard, you know, they started with media, RT, that got shut down. So then you just find other ways to do it, don't you? And this is clear evidence that that's what they do. And it's clear evidence that they recognize that social media is the free speech environment to really work with because it's such a wild west. And now we've got hard evidence on top of hard evidence that we've seen in the UK for Russia just wanting to nudge our politics to suit its own purposes. I was talking to Dominic Grieve just yesterday, I think it was, about exactly this. Given what we're seeing in the States, do we need to revisit the Russia report? And he said, yes, sometimes I go on X and I see people saying release the Russia report. Well, it has been released, but it was just released in a heavily redacted form. And I can tell you that it's not going to be released in an unredacted form, but there are very serious issues that are there that have come out through other channels as well. And certainly it's probably a good idea to do follow up on it in the current context. So I think the answer is not necessarily going back to the Russia report, but rather building on the Russia report and building on those lines of inquiry so that you're not just clarifying what's happened in the past, but rather what are the safeguards for the future? Where's the plan in order to keep our democracy open and free with lots of free speech, but not let that get corroded? So how do we genuinely protect free speech so that it's not hijacked by outside influence with malicious intent?
And we're now going to be joined by Paul Conroy. Now, Paul has been in Ukraine for 2 years. He's a fantastic photojournalist, documentary maker. And I was with him and Zirini Zabriskie in Kherson just for a day. They'd spent months there. And you can see journalists are targeted. So, Paul, you know, we see the effects you day to day of Russian targeting of journalists in a physical sense, bombing their apartments, dropping drones on them, sending missiles over to the cafes where they meet. How does this kind of level of disinformation, especially from figures in America, figures in Britain, affect the actual frontline experience of the war?
No. And let's be perfectly honest about this. Who in their right tiny mind believed that some semi-literate numbskull sitting in a basement with a Fisher-Price set of headphones and a plastic microphone pontificating about Russia and Ukraine while never having left their mother's basement and been anywhere near a war zone had anything of any value to add to this conversation, let alone to sit and push Kremlin dribble into the world while people are actually dying here. You know, that is, it sounds funny when you think about it, that people could be so stupid to believe that what they had to say was worth $40,000 a show. The fact that they never sat and considered that they are talentless voices in the void, and all of a sudden they're getting paid $40,000 a show. Where the hell did they think that money was coming from? You know, just seriously, where the hell did they believe that what they had to say was worth anything like that? For them to claim they didn't know where the money coming from is staggering. You know, my contempt is uncontained for these people and their idiocy and the danger they pose to real life people on the ground. They have no understanding of this war and what's happening. They've just been pushing out Kremlin pieces for money, blood money. It's international. You know, anyone who says has no connection to Russians, you know, is living in their own chosen dream world. it is deliberately, it is turning and looking the other way because there's something in it for them, and it either fits a political agenda or, as it turns out, it can make you quite affluent. But yeah, of course, it's happening in Britain. Britain is Russia's bank. It's where they send all their filthy money to be washed. It's been going on with the chemical warfare attacks in Britain. So, and it's not isolated or stuck in Britain. This is worldwide. The Russia's tentacles get everywhere, and I'm glad they've been found out. And I hope that people react in the correct way to this. I hope there is the appropriate amount of derision and and disgust at the way these people will line their filthy pockets with filthy money and spread their filthy, dangerous propaganda on behalf of Russia. The shame should be unlimited.
And finally, we're going to hear Liz Webster, who's behind Save British Farming. She's been a great writer for Byline and understands exactly how the disinformation around Brexit, all the disruption they cause, how that affects the lives of people on the ground, from the riots to farmers just trying to get by, when all this false information vitiates our politics and affects how people live their lives.
Yeah, I mean, look, my wound in terms of the referendum has never healed, and I've never forgotten about how deeply illegitimate that referendum was and is, and it still is. I sat in the court, actually, in the court of appeal, and heard the government's lawyer explain to the judge that the government conceded that the referendum was corrupt. But it got away with it because it was advisory. The courts couldn't vitiate the referendum because it was advisory. If it had been on another legal footing, it would have been scrapped by the courts. So we all know that the level of interference in that referendum made the result unsafe, particularly given how close the result was. But what I don't understand is why, now that Labour have got an enormous majority and they're wanting to hold the Conservatives to account for 14 years of a shambles, the most simple thing for them to do would be to get the Russia report out. What's the point of having a report into something if it's never used? The whole idea of reports and inquiries is so that there's public learning. Why is it hidden? Come on, Keir Starmer, we want to see this report. We've got a jolly good idea what's in it, but this country needs to see the evidence that was accumulated by our authorities, and we need to have some absolute clarity on why our country has been punished with a deeply damaging Brexit, which has still got a lot more damage to deliver going forward. Well, we know that the Conservatives had the Conservative Friends of Russia. We know that Boris Johnson went over to Italy, to have a party with Lebedev, who is now in the House of Lords. These issues are here, as I said, like an open wound, rotting, and nobody's looking at them. And now we've got a change of government. Why isn't Keir Starmer doing something about this? This is deeply upsetting, but also concerning. This goes to the absolute heart of our safety and security moving forward. Look what Vladimir Putin is doing to Ukraine. They don't need to send weapons over to Britain because we're infested with Russian interference in our entire system. We don't need bombs. We've got propaganda here. Not only that, we've got interference at the heart of power. It sort of reminds me of the early days of the Cameron coalition, when a lot of information was coming out about the Millie Dowler case, which actually prompted Leveson. And this is what we need. We need the people who are concerned about this to not just keep giving up because we gave up with the Conservatives who wouldn't do anything. We need to get back and organise and start asking this new government with a huge majority to do something about the corruption which is at the heart of our system.
And talking about the actions of the sanctioned Russia Today RT organization and Tenet, they are also active on other fronts, including film festivals, where a Russia Today director has sponsored and funded a movie which has caused a lot of controversy by depicting sympathetic Russian version of the Ukrainian front line. Now, the first person to raise the alarm about this was Sergeant Ashton Carrillo, and we spoke to them in Kyiv.
Just moments ago, I put up a tweet about Anastasia Trofimova. Anastasia Trofimova is the prime example of what we would know as Russian soft power. She has ties to the Kadyrov regime. She brought the New York Times to Grozny just this summer in the middle of the war. You don't get to Grozny, you don't get to the Kadyrovites without having access to the Kremlin. A month later, she brought the Washington Post to very sensitive areas thanks to a hookup from, of all people, Maria Butina, the spy who was captured in the United States and then traded over to the Russian Federation. So what we're seeing in the Venice Film Festival is a key indicator of Russian soft power. And I would not be surprised to know that Anastasia Trofimova would also be directly on the Kremlin's payroll, either through the financing of her films or, in fact, just getting a salary in order to spy on the unwitting journalists of the New York Times and Washington Post. Byline Times has done an amazing job, and I just want to make one fast comment. An indictment that was unsealed yesterday, a search warrant that was unsealed yesterday against Russian cyber criminals. The Byline Times was actually cited on page 113 of the government filing. Again, journalists are heroes, and the Byline Times helps lead the way with that.
So thanks for watching. Now we have revealed and discovered this week how Russia funds podcasts and TV shows. Unlike them, Byline TV is not. It's funded by you, our subscribers. You can become a member or you can support Byline Times, which helps also funds all the great activity we do here, all the great people we talk to, and our producers who do such a brilliant job getting the true information to you without bias or favor, and no oligarchs or Russians funding us in the background. So support us any way you can. You can support us on YouTube. You can follow us. I think you can donate on YouTube. But to keep the truth going, we need your support. So thank you in advance for your help.